I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Foley Institute, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event this evening. Before I introduce our honored guest, let me just remind you of two other events we have upcoming. One is this Thursday at 4:30. We have a panel of experts who are going to be talking about the politics of addiction. This is actually a follow-on from our panel we had this morning, or this afternoon, at noontime today. And they're going to be talking about the genetic and environmental and behavioral causes of addiction and the different types of policy responses to that. The next Wednesday, we have Amy Allen from Penn State University. She'll be speaking here at noon. She'll be talking about the psychoanalysis and the politics of conspiracy, explaining why some people believe in political conspiracy theories and other people don't. So I encourage you to come to both of those. Today, however, we are very, very fortunate, and I'm very honored to have with us the Consul-General of Japan, Giro Yamada. And I'm particularly pleased about this because many of you may not know this, but Tom Foley, after he was Speaker of the U.S. House, was appointed by President Clinton to become the U.S. Ambassador to Japan, where he served for several years. And it was one of the fondest periods of his life, he often used to say. And I remember going and visiting the speaker before he passed away, and he always had lots of pictures of his time in Japan around his house, and very much enjoyed his time there. Japan is, of course, one of the world's most successful democracies and also one of the largest economies. The U.S. alliance with Japan is the cornerstone of the United States' security interests in Asia. For years, that alliance has been based on shared interests and values, including the maintenance of stability in the region, the promotion of political and economic freedoms, and support for human rights and democratic institutions. In recent years, however, that alliance has become a bit more fraught. Not only has the Trump administration's mercurial relationship with North Korea raised strategic security concerns, but the president's hardline on trade has also produced tensions, as both sides seek to avoid a trade war. And we were just talking earlier, and I'm sure the Consul General will talk about this in a few minutes, that there was supposed to be a trade pact signed this week between the leaders of the two countries, and we're not certain that will happen, but maybe it will. Fortunately, we have with us probably the person best able to speak to these issues and the more general relationship between the United States and Japan. Mr. Yamada joined the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1984. After serving as the DCM in Kenya and Belgium, he was appointed as the Consul-General of Japan in Seattle in 2017. He believes that the best service an overseas mission can provide is to facilitate exchanges by connecting goodwill people with potential partners across borders. His past overseas postings have included Moscow, Brussels, Warsaw, New York, and Nairobi. Mr. Yamada has a BA from the University of Tokyo and an MPA from the Columbia University. Join me now in welcoming Mr. Yamada.
Konbanwa.
Konbanwa. Well, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. First, I would like to know what the audience I'm going to talk to. So, well, judging from how you look, I think you are university students. Any postgraduate students here? All right. First year students, raise your hands. Okay. Second year, third year, fourth year. All right. Thank you very much. Anybody having visited Japan in the past? Anybody having enjoyed the stay in Japan? Sorry. Well, yeah, well, thank you for the kind introduction, Director. My name is Yoichiro Yamada, and the people call me Giro because Yoichiro is so complicated. And I've been here in Seattle for 2 years and 3 months now. I'm constantly asked how I am finding life and work in Seattle, and I always say that it's fascinating. It's so enriching, enlightening, and not just I love living in this part of the world, but also my wife, who speaks very poor English, She loves it, and my boy, I have a 10-year-old boy. He likes it, likes attending the school so much. But he says, we once asked him whether he wants to, us to take him to a Disneyland during during the Thanksgiving holiday. And he said, "No, I want to go to school." By the way, he knows, what a nice place Disneyland is. We have Tokyo Disneyland, and he has been there. So, well, anyway, we all love Seattle. Before talking about the international situation surrounding Japan, and today I'm going to sort of briefly discuss Japan-U.S.-China relationship in a broad outlines. I do not want to give go into the details because there's not probably enough time for that. And I think rather than me talking about speaking from my perspective, I think I would lay out the what I see as a basic and a big picture. And I'd like to invite questions from you and having a discussion with you. But before moving into that, I want to talk a little bit about Japan and Washington State because Washington State means a lot to us. The first immigrants came to here about in 1880s. The first Japanese, by the way, arrived in Washington State in 1834. Yeah, as a result of a shipwreck, and 14 months out on the sea, and 3 boys out of ship crew of 14 survived and arrived here, and was then taken to the United Kingdom. Was it the United Kingdom at the time? No, to Britain, and they became the first person to enter the city of London. And then the London government thought that they could use these in Japanese, but that particular Japanese as shipping, negotiating chip to force open Japan, which at that time had a closed door policy. But then they were repaired, and the way how they were repaired triggered the moving of how do you call it? The wheel of the time, which then led to the Japan changing. Japan opening our doors as a direct result of the American warship visiting in 1853. But it all started, from this shipwreck and the 3 boys arriving on the coast of Washington. Well, today, there was this long history of the immigrants. After the Chinese were forbidden to come in the 1870s, I think, or even in 1880s. It was the Japanese who replaced the Chinese as the dominant laborers in agricultural sector and as railway construction workers. And then they persisted, and by the time the Second World War started, they say that 2/3 or 3/4 of all the merchants, all the market traders that were taking their produce to the market at the Pike Place Market, Pike Place Market in Seattle, were Japanese and the Japanese Americans. But all of them had to be taken to imprisonment into internment camps. That was a hard time. But then there was this story of 442nd Regiment, entirely comprising of the Japanese volunteer, young soldiers, sacrificing their blood and life, and in an attempt to prove their loyalty as an American citizen. So they became the most decorated regiment in the entire history of the United States, and but that means how much sacrifice they had to endure. But thanks to all these, I think patience and the sacrifice that the Japanese Americans made, they garnered very a good name for the word Japanese. They were Americans, but they helped to garner the good name Japanese for the and that laid the foundation of the significant and rapid re-establishment of good trusting relationship between Japan and the United States, despite the bitterness of war that were fought for 3 plus years, up to the Japanese surrender in 1945. Today, we import from the Washington State really lots of agricultural products, maritime products, timber products, and if you visit Japan and go to Mac and eat fried potatoes, then you must have eaten potato produced in Washington State. And if you eat spaghetti, then you are probably have eaten the spaghetti produced in Washington State. That's that influential. And of course, the companies of Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, Starbucks, they are all changing the way how we live in a very, very profound way. And I think there's increasing importance of that area as a hub to produce the technologies of the next generation. I'm talking about artificial intelligence and cloud computing based services, and they are what is attracting a lot of attention from all over the world, including Japan. So whether it was a past, whether it was a present and the future, there are so many things that connect Washington State, including Pullman, this and Spokane area. Lots of Japanese Americans used to live here, and if not Pullman, I'm not too sure about Pullman, but did consider made a considerable impact on the economy in the old days. So whether it is past or future, our connections are really strong. And next year we are going to have Olympic Games in Tokyo and Paralympic Games in Tokyo. It's a little bit too hot and humid for my liking, but for those who cannot resist sport, no matter whatever the temperature, please do visit Japan. And there are nice cool places, even if it is in the midst of summer. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about the Japan, US, and China. And the director mentioned the impending trade talks, signing of a trade deal between Japanese Prime Minister and US President Donald Trump. We hope it will happen. And but that trade talks was a direct result of the pulling out of the United States from multilateral trade and overall economic, a new economic community of 12 nations that will be set up from many rules and standards and regulations that would set the tone for economic cooperation of the 21st century. There were very high level intellectual property protection and digital economy provisions. There are labor standards, there are environmental standards. There are high bars set for cooperation amongst these 12 countries in so many areas. And as a result, if the countries coordinate their rules and standards in those important areas, then there would be a negotiated a reduction in the trade barriers, particularly the tariffs. And when President Trump decided to withdraw the United States from the TPP-12, Japan and countries like Australia and Canada, we thought, well, the big and the most important country is leaving. What are we going to do? Will we leave it to death and to die, or will we keep it until the United States probably changes mind and come back? Yeah, that's we have negotiated for so many years and achieved such a wonderful, rule-setting arrangement, multilateral arrangement, for the 21st century. Let's keep it. So TPP 11 countries did a little bit of renegotiation and but agreed on a set of standards that are largely in line with, or that largely inherited what has been agreed with the United States. And United States, as you know, started to Mr. Trump started to talk about the need to change NAFTA drastically. I came to agreement of U.S., Mexico, Canada, USMCA. How much drastically it has been changed, that's a matter of a great contention, but it was done. And the Japan is important a trading company, trading partner, probably the number 3 after Canada, after China and Canada, and so a very important partner. So there was to be a bilateral agreement. It doesn't encompass the agreement, which may probably be signed by the 2 leaders within a week, will not encompass all areas of economic activity covered by a TPP 11, but it's limited to trade in goods. But still, we regard it as important because we were really afraid that Mr. Trump might really make true of his threatened increase in tariff on the Japanese cars from the current 2.5% to 25%. And United States, particularly the farmers, were worried that they were very fast losing Japanese market to competitors from Australia and Canada, for products like wheat, potatoes, meat, and so many more products. So, and with the U.S.-China trade dispute going really ugly. Anybody recording? I said it. But it's ugly, isn't it? I think U.S. farmers and others really wanted to deal, and the president and the administration understood the need to conclude a deal. Well, Japan, the United States, and China are number 1, 2, 3 economies in terms of size of the GDP. Of course, the Europeans might say that, oh well, don't forget about the European Union because we form an economic space, and yes, of course. But when we talk about the countries, these 3 countries put together account for 46% of the world's GDP. So the economic trade and investment arrangement that are made either bilaterally or trilaterally or multilaterally between these 3 countries have a lot of impact on the world economy, particularly on the economy in the Western Pacific. As for Japan, you probably have heard about really, nasty. I like this word. I don't, but trade conflict that existed between Japan and the United States in the early 1990s. Not just 1990s, but culminating into the early 1990s. And at that time, the U.S. trade deficit vis-a-vis Japan counted for 60% of all the U.S. bilateral trade deficit against the world. Then from Japan, United States was the world number 1 trade partner for Japan until 2006, and then the China replaced the United States as the number 1 trade partner for Japan. Today, China accounts for 22% of Japan's trade, whereas the United States accounts for 15%. And after the really bad trade war and between Japan and the United States, and some U.S. politicians were breaking Japanese radios and televisions, and even Japanese-made cars in front of TV cameras to show how angry they were against about this trade deficit, which they thought was the result of the Japanese protectionism. Whether that was true or not, and to what extent it was true or not, the Japanese companies, particularly the car-making companies, made a really large investment in the United States after the 1990s, and now in order to mitigate, the trade war, and in order to be seen as contributing more to the U.S. economy. So that is the direct investment by Japanese companies to the United States. The accumulated Japanese investment into United States today stands at approximately 490 billion US dollars. And we these days talk a lot about our investment, the direct investment we make into China, but Japanese direct investment into China today stands at 120 billion US dollars. So US has 4 times more direct investment. What it's not indirect investment, direct investment. Making of factories and employing usually the green field investment, and making factories usually, from scratch, from a barren, from a green field. And so although our bilateral trade deficit, with the United States remained largely at the same level in value terms, in dollar terms, at around today 70 billion US dollars in favor of Japan. It was about the same amount in early 1990s. The big difference is that in early 1990s, that accounted for 60% or so of U.S. bilateral trade deficit against the world, 70%. But the same amount, about 70 billion US dollars, that United States has in red against Japan, is today only 7.7% of all the United States bilateral trade deficit. Instead, China has become the biggest source of U.S. bilateral trade deficit. It now accounts for 47.7. Why I said 0.7 because I like the number 7. It's such a stark contrast. Japan accounting for 7.7%. China is accounting for 47.7% of all the U.S. bilateral trade deficit against the world. And so Japanese companies these days are creating about 800,000 direct employment throughout the United States through these direct investment. Well, Seattle has got a population of 740,000 or something like that. So it's bigger than Seattle, but the impact probably is bigger than this 800,000 figure suggests. And somebody was writing, I don't know how accurate that was, but economist was writing that the value of products produced by all these Japanese companies that are set up in the United States are about the same as the GDP of Poland. So it's not a small country. It's a country of 38 million people. So this is as how much our companies are doing in direct ways, and they are doing a lot of community contribution to the community. Why I say that? Because this shows how Japan, particularly the companies, perceive the importance of the United States, as a market and as an ally and as a partner, and changed tack from making as many things as possible in Japan and exporting to the United States And seeing that this tactic has produced a lot of tensions with the United States, they have changed tack and started to, create a lot of factories inside the United States and blending into the regional community and being a good corporate citizen. And they are in places like Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee, and the sort of places that most Japanese would consider as a very remote inland area. I'm not going to mention figures between U.S. and China, apart from this 47.7%. What I want to say, and is that the U.S.-China conflict is different fundamentally, qualitatively, from existing conflict between Japan and the United States. If Japan-U.S. Trade and economic conflicts is about the numbers, about the size of the trade deficit and current account deficit, about the number of Japanese cars imported to the United States, etc. It's within the established order. It's being managed and manageable. It's just about the numbers. But a conflict between United States and China is more fundamental. You have, of course, heard about the Belt and Road Initiative pursued by Mr. Xi Jinping, and it's about the world order. China seems to be creating an alternative, a world order, and with apparently new, I think, settlement and currency mechanisms, and with infrastructure led by Chinese companies, spreading all over the world, and submarine cables. So many of them have been laid by Huawei Marine, which is a subsidiary of the Huawei companies, and the United States government is so much worried about the IP theft and cyber attack that the Chinese state might be able to launch. Well, there are no completely independent companies in China. They, by law, they have to submit all the data and appliances that they have used to collect data to the Chinese state if they are so ordered. And if the United States represents open, a transparent, free and accountable order based upon the rule of law that is applicable to all, without exceptions, of course. Rule of law and the law which is transparent. Then Chinese a world order seems to be a very murky and transparent and arbitrary, manipulative, and even sometimes aggressive and coercive. There is a growing anxiety about the heavy indebtedness of the developing countries that have I become a member of the BRI and taken a large sum of debt from the Chinese companies and Chinese banks, etc. So I think the U.S. Government in Washington D.C., whether they are Republicans or Democrats, they seem to be in a strong agreement that the U.S. Supremacy and hegemony and U.S.-led order is being strongly, fundamentally being challenged by Mr. Xi Jinping's China. And technology is what we are excited about these days. I earlier mentioned AI and Internet of Things, cloud computing. There are talks about the diapers, even having computer chips to let the doctors or mothers know that it's time to change diapers, etc. And but this 5G technology, the Huawei seems to be the most be able to offer the cheapest and reliable technology. Everybody wants technology that is reliable and cheap, but if you adopt that, then the worry is that somehow the privacy, personal data, trade secrets, IP, they all may find its way to China, and so they might be included in the, might be used as a tool for the creation of a surveillance society, police state, technology-empowered police state. That's the big worry. I have personally a worry about that because Japan was like that, in the years leading up to the Second World War, and during the war, there was secret police. If you are, a strong critic of the government and of the military, then you might get a knock on the door at 4 o'clock. Probably they wouldn't bother to knock on the door. They simply come in and grab you, and silence you, torture you, etc. That seems to be what's happening in China, according to many newspapers. So there seems to be a fundamental rivalry between a free, open society and the world order that has been very carefully crafted and constructed by the leadership of the United States up to now, and the looming, I would say, danger of lots of countries falling in line with the China-led order. And China, and so many things about China are intransparent that we cannot verify easily whether all that is reported in the press are really true or not. But the signs are that what we read in the newspapers may really be true. So it's the China-U.S. rivalry is about the world order. What sort of a civilization model would become dominant, and where you will stand in this great rivalry between these free society and surveillance society. It's very much like the new Cold War. The China's economy is now completely blended and into the world order, and it's an integral part of the supply chain. So it's really fundamentally different from the days of the East-West Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union, when Soviet Union was nothing, in terms of the world economic system. China is so big, important, and needed, and is already an integral part. But at the same time, in the realm of technology, in the realm of currency transaction, mechanism that China is constructing, there seems to be similar to a East-West confrontation of the Cold War years. I think I would stop here. I was deliberately provocative, and but the I just wanted to to give you some probably food for thought. Good food or not, I don't guarantee, but I really wanted you to think broadly about how the world is changing, who is leading, and what sort of society we are going to see, by starkly contrasting the kind of a society that will be led by the United States and the one led by China. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to answering questions.
Thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes for some Q&A. Maybe I'll start us off. You talked a lot about sort of the economic rivalry between the United States and China and Japan's role in that. I wonder if you'd say a little bit about military and security concerns and whether or not there's because one of the things that President Trump has also talked about is not just trade, but has been less supportive of some of our international alliances and more concerned about the cost of those alliances to the United States. Is there a concern in Japan about the nature of the U.S. security agreement, especially with respect to China?
Well, we think that the Japan-U.S. Security ties are solid and stable and reliable. And Prime Minister Abe, 4 years ago, in 2015, changed the interpretation of the Article 9 of the Constitution, which is widely referred to as the peace constitution. We renounced war as a means to solve international problems, and we say that we will not have army or navy to that end. Well, I'm not going into this mountain of constitutional arguments, but what Mr. Abe did, but there has been really strong constraints, strong restrictions on what the Japanese self-defense forces could do, particularly in terms of operations overseas. That was a backlash from the really hideous war that the Japanese military forces unleashed, and resulting in so many losses of life, and amongst the American soldiers, amongst Chinese, Filipinos, and so many others, and of course including Japanese civilians too. So in the 2015, Constitution was reinterpreted to allow a more active role for the Japanese self-defense forces, and now Japanese SDF is capable of assisting U.S. operations when it comes to the defense of Japan in a much more proactive ways. Japan's seas stretch from the border of Russia all the way to Taiwan, and that's the road that Chinese Navy wants to or needs to take in order to get out into the wider Pacific Ocean. There's a chain of islands called the first island chain of defense, consisting of Okinawa and Ryukyu Islands, Taiwan, and the Philippines, and the Chinese, ocean-going navy really wanted to, have a capacity to go outside of these islands. That's why they have been so active in challenging our control and ownership of Senkaku Islands, and some of the islands of not islands, probably not the how do you call it? They made they made artificial islands anyway, in the South China Sea, and so they are the Chinese military have been expanding in value terms by more than 10% every year for 28 years since 1990, and it has become massive. And it is now it has 3 aircraft carriers. It is capable of launching some really advanced missiles that are probably capable of sinking the U.S. Aircraft carriers, they say. So the weapons may be very capable, but the unleashing these weapons and really actually attacking them would really lead to war, possibly a nuclear war. And if the Chinese are reasonable and calculate the gains and losses, they would probably do that. But I think there is a lot of worry about the Chinese military, advancement, military progress, and the actual encroachment of the defense capabilities. Of the some territorial seas and the lands on the first island chain that belong to Japan, etc. Well, we now agree that U.S.-Japan military alliance has always been important, but is becoming all the more important. The Chinese, come and invade our territorial waters probably once every 3-4 days, and they come closer. Not invading into our territorial waters, but just outside. They come so menacingly close once every 2 or 3 days. And the Chinese military aircraft, encroach the Japanese, military airspace twice a day, on average, every day. So they are challenging our resolve, and Japan and the U.S. Has got constantly something like 50,000, currently 58,000 service persons. That's just service persons stationed in Japan at any time. It's the largest deployment of U.S. military service service persons in any country in the world, and we coordinate our activities in all areas. So we do not want to provoke China, or no matter how much China is provoking us, but we want to, and China militarily and politically maybe maybe a threat to a great extent, but I think commercially and economically they are very important partner, and we have to somehow make these elements of a state-to-state relationship come to terms and find optimal, I think, a relationship. But we cannot let our guards down.
So you kind of touched on this issue a lot. So with China expanding its dominance in the South China Sea, and also its increasing global economic presence around the world, does that leave like Japan like at a point where it's like we really can't do anything towards China, that we just have to see how the future unfolds? Or is Japan worried that China might continue to like stretch out towards its territories?
Thank you. Good question. What can we do, to stop China or change China? We know that most of the Chinese, no matter how much indoctrinated by the state ideology, we know that they are the same human beings. They want peace. They want good life. They want that their children enjoy life. They want the safety for the children, etc. They want the same thing. So I think starting from that point, then we will be able to somehow find a common ground. But how are we going to do that when there is a monopoly of power, by the Chinese Communist Party? In our society, in the United States, the political power changes rather frequently, between the two parties. In Japan, there was only one shift to the opposition in the to speak of in the past 60 years, and then it moved back to the rule of the Liberal Democratic Party. But we can speak whatever we want. We do criticize our government policies. Many people do that, and you can do that without fearing getting arrested by the authorities or tortured. I think the Chinese, not Chinese citizens, most of them are wanting the same society. So we were, hoping that as the China, enters the World Trade Organization, in the year 2000, I think it was, and then get richer, then there will be a desire for political freedom, but it hasn't materialized apparently as yet. But in the end, China is diversing in material ways, because they are now able to pay so many things and purchase through the Alipay and these e-commerce, in which they are much more advanced than Japan, who stick to the cash. I stick to cash, but anyway, this growing, I think, diversity of Chinese life, at least materially, must, and hopefully must, be influencing the way how the Chinese want political and civil freedom, and any change has to come from within. It cannot be imposed from outside. China is too powerful, too confident, too proud, and to accept any change in the values from outside. But I think well, let's see what can we do. I don't have an answer.
So we probably have time for one last question.
Yes. So, probably you.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Okinawa military bases? I was just curious if you knew what exactly was going on with that.
Well, I have never visited Okinawa, but the Okinawa houses, I think about 30,000 U.S. naval and marine service persons, and it really occupies a big chunk. 1/5 of the territory, the land area of Okinawa, and very important land area they occupy. So there are, from the viewpoint of the Okinawans, they suffer from the loudness of noise. And quite often the service persons assault young women and rape them, etc. And whenever that happens, then there is I think a big protest from amongst the people. But the U.S. Commanders really want to, keep on contributing to Okinawa in all sorts of ways, and want to, maintain a good relationship. Only bad things get reported in the news, and so we end up, reading, once again, some. Parts have fallen, onto the ground, playground of the elementary school from flying a helicopter, etc. It's dangerous. Another girl being raped, etc. But largely, U.S. is contributing a lot to the economy in Okinawa, and now the most dangerous airfield of Denmark has been agreed to be shifted elsewhere, and Camp Schwab, Henoko, has been designated as a site, and there is work going on to build the new base to move that dangerous airfield there. And so we hope, and there is a talk about shifting the Marines from Okinawa to Guam, etc. And we hope that these would go a long way towards mitigating the feeling and the sense of security of the Okinawans. We will see.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I think our time is up. On behalf of the Institute, let me thank all of you for coming out this afternoon, and let me also say again how honored we are that you came and visited the Institute. Join me now in thanking Consul-General Yamada for a really interesting conversation.